Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture June 6, 1944. It's 5:00 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
But, and this is a really important distinction, I don't want you to picture what we usually see in the movies.
Right. No shaking hands on a boat.
Exactly. No sea spray hitting your face, no metal ramp of a Higgins boat about to drop you right into the water. We are actually not doing the American perspective today.
No, we're going about 100 feet up. We are inside a concrete bunker, peering through a really narrow slit and looking down at the dark water.
Right. It's damp. It smells like, wet wool, stale tobacco, and curing concrete. The silence is incredibly heavy. In this scenario, you are Oberleutnant Klaus Richter.
And based on the letters and the regimental diaries we've pulled for this deep dive, Richter isn't, well, he's not some mustache-twirling villain from a comic book.
No.
That's the very first thing we have to strip away. He's 32 years old. He's a professional soldier, a career man.
And he's seen some things, too. I mean, he's a veteran of the Eastern Front, which was a complete nightmare of its own. So he's pragmatic, he's tired, and honestly,
Yeah.
he seems pretty skeptical of his own government's propaganda at this point.
He really does. And that's the exact lens we're using today. We want to look at D-Day through his binoculars. Because when you shift the perspective from the beach up to the bunker, the story completely changes.
It really does.
It stops being a story about individual courage, and it becomes a story about a collision.
A collision between two totally different worlds.
Right. As the source material puts it, it's a collision between a finely crafted sword and a steam-powered drop hammer.
I love that image so much. The sword versus the drop hammer. So let's kind of unpack that. Richter is sitting in this bunker, which is part of the famous Atlantic Wall.
Right.
But the reality he's living in every day is very different from what the German newspapers are printing back home, isn't it?
Oh, it's night and day. And this is the first big disconnect we see in the sources. The Atlantic Wall was sold to the German public, and frankly to the whole world, as this impenetrable chain of steel and concrete stretching all the way from Norway down to Spain.
Fortress Europe.
Exactly, Fortress Europe. The propaganda said it absolutely could not be breached.
But Richter is actually sitting inside it. He can see all the cracks.
Literally, he knows the wall is just a patchwork. There were huge sections where bunkers weren't even finished, just, rebar sticking out of the mud.
Wow.
There were minefields that looked terrifying on a map, but had massive gaps in reality. The sources actually mention that Richter knew about shortcuts through the defensive lines that local French farmers were still using.
Just to move their cattle.
Just to move their cattle.
That is wild. I mean, if a farmer can walk his cow through your impenetrable defensive line, you have to assume an Allied commando can probably get through too.
Precisely. And Richter wasn't the only one losing sleep over this. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, he knew it too. He took command of the defenses in early 1944 and basically had a panic attack.
Because he realized the wall was a total myth.
Right.
And Rommel was completely obsessed with stopping the invasion specifically on the beach, right? He had this working theory that once the Allies got inland, it was just over.
The first 24 hours are the only ones that matter.
Oh.
That was his constant mantra. He knew if the Allies established a real beachhead, their supply lines would just completely overwhelm Germany. So he started improvising.
Which brings us to Rommel's asparagus.
Yes.
Which, by the way, sounds like a terrible side dish.
It does, but it was incredibly nasty stuff. Rommel knew the Atlantic Wall had these glaring holes, so he tried to plug them with millions of jagged steel logs, mines, and obstacles planted right in the tidal zones.
Just trying to rip the bottoms out of the landing craft.
Exactly. Before they even touched the sand. He was frantic.
Yeah.
He was trying to use wood and wire to stop a literal juggernaut.
So the tension is just building and building for months. Everyone knows the invasion is coming eventually. But then June 5th hits.
Mm-hmm.
The day before. And the German military, which, really prides itself on discipline and readiness, suddenly totally relaxes. Why?
Meteorology. It all comes down to a single weather report.
Yeah.
On June 5th, a massive low-pressure system rolled in. We're talking gale-force winds, freezing rain, incredibly rough seas.
It's the kind of weather where you literally cannot land a boat.
Right. The German meteorologists, who were usually excellent, by the way, looked at their charts and essentially said, there is zero chance of an invasion in these conditions. They predicted the storm would last for days.
And they were so confident in that forecast that Rommel actually left the front.
He did. He actually went home to Germany. It was his wife's birthday on June 6th, and he wanted to surprise her with a pair of shoes.
No!
That is how completely safe they felt. The absolute commander of the defenses was buying shoes in Hurlingen while the invasion force was engines on across the channel.
That is just an incredible historical detail.
Yeah.
So let's jump back to Richter. It's the morning of the 6th. The storm has passed, but
Yeah.
still pretty choppy. It's misty.
Yeah.
He's probably drinking some terrible substitute coffee, just ending his shift. The mood isn't terror, it's just routine.
Yeah, it's the total boredom of the night watch. He fully thinks he has another few days of safety. And then he looks out at the channel.
And he sees something.
He sees a smudge. Just this dark, thin line where the gray sea meets the gray sky.
At first he assumes it's just weather, right? Like a squall line moving in.
Or a trick of the early morning light. But then the smudge doesn't move like a cloud system. It starts to harden, it grows, it sharpens. And this is where the sensory details and the personal accounts get really haunting. Richter describes the exact moment his brain had to switch from natural phenomenon to man-made object.
Oh, man. The cognitive dissonance.
Right, because what he was seeing wasn't a fleet in the traditional sense. The source material says it looked like a city of steel was literally floating toward him.
I really want to talk about the scale here, because I think it's so hard for us to grasp today. German intelligence had strict estimates for what the Allies could practically throw at them. What were they expecting?
Their absolute worst-case scenario, the absolute maximum they thought the Allies could scrape together from every port, was about 3,000 ships.
Okay. And what was Richter actually looking at through his binoculars that morning?
Nearly 7,000 vessels.
So 7,000. That is, I mean, that's not just more ships. That's a completely different reality.
It's a totally different magnitude. It broke their basic understanding of what was possible in warfare. The description in the text says it looked like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Just a solid, unbroken mass of metal. Richter tries to count them. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transport craft, but he physically can't.
Because there's too many.
The fleet literally bent the horizon.
But wait, I have to ask, how did the Germans get the numbers so wrong? How do you hide 4,000 extra ships from the enemy? This brings us to that deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, right?
Oh, this part is fascinating. The Allies didn't just hide the ships. They created a completely fake army to draw German attention somewhere else. They created the first United States Army Group, which was a totally fictitious unit.
This was the famous Ghost Army.
Yes. And they put General George Patton in charge of it because the Germans feared him more than anyone else. They stationed this fake army in Dover, directly across from the Pas de Calais, which is the shortest possible route across the English Channel.
Making it the most logical place to attack.
Exactly. But it wasn't just on paper. They built inflatable rubber tanks. They built fake landing craft out of plywood and canvas.
And they pumped out fake radio traffic, didn't they?
Constantly, round the clock. They had specialized radio operators sending orders to non-existent divisions, complaining about lack of supplies for non-existent tanks. German listening posts picked all this up, triangulated it, and bought it hook, line, and sinker. They were utterly convinced the main attack was coming at Calais.
So Richter is staring at Normandy, seeing the literal end-of-the-world approach, but his high command is staring at a map of Calais, waiting for Patton to show up.
Exactly. Which leads directly to this frantic phone call. Richter grabs the bunker's field telephone, he calls his headquarters, and he's screaming into the receiver, there are thousands of ships. The horizon is black.
And the response on the other end is just, it's maddening.
It's completely dismissive. The officer on the other end is tired. He's looking at the official weather report that says invasion impossible, and he's looking at the intelligence report that says invasion coming at Calais. So he tells Richter, the sea conditions aren't suitable. You're spooked by shadows. Just calm down.
That is gaslighting on a monumental historical scale. You are standing there watching the largest armada in human history approach your beach, and your boss is telling you it's a shadow.
Richter actually yells back at him, I'm looking at it with my own eyes. The weather is clear enough to see the end of the world.
The end of the world. That specific phrase really sticks with me.
It should. Because for the German military machine, it really was. But even then, the paralysis at the top level is total. While Richter is begging for permission to open fire, the high command is having a debate about whether these ships are just a diversion for the real attack at Calais.
They won't wake up Hitler to ask for the tanks.
Right. They absolutely refuse to wake him. They won't release the Panzer reserves.
But Richter can't wait for Berlin to figure it out. The ships are getting closer by the second. So just before 6:00 a.m., his battery, the 352nd Artillery Regiment, opens fire. And this starts the actual battle phase of our deep dive.
And here is the thing from the sources that really surprised me. For the first few minutes, maybe the first hour or so, It actually felt like a fair fight. To the men in the bunker, it maybe even felt like a fight they were winning.
Right, because they score a massive hit early on, the USS Corey.
Yes, an American destroyer. Richter's guns bracket the ship, and they land a direct, devastating hit in the engineering spaces. The ship immediately starts listing. High-pressure steam is pouring out. It's sinking fast.
And Richter's men are actually cheering in the bunker.
They are. You really have to imagine the adrenaline pumping through them. They've been training for years just for this specific moment. They see an enemy ship, they fire, the ship sinks. It completely validated everything they'd been told by their officers. We are the elite. We are the impenetrable Atlantic wall.
But that cheer, it dies pretty fast, doesn't
And
it?
instantly, because they sink the Corey, and what happens? Absolutely nothing. The gap in the massive Allied formation is filled immediately by two other destroyers sliding right into its place. The fleet didn't stop, it didn't scatter, it didn't panic.
Why?
It was like throwing a pebble at a moving freight train.
And this is where the realization hits Richter. The source says he felt like a man with a bucket trying to empty the ocean.
And then the ocean hits back. And we really need to talk about the sheer physics of this because the movies do not do it justice at all. The Allied response wasn't just shooting back. It was the USS Texas and the USS Arkansas turning broadside to the beach.
And the Texas has those massive 14-inch guns.
Think about a solid steel shell the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, traveling at supersonic speeds, packed solid with high explosives. When those shells hit the concrete bluffs, they didn't just make a crater. They literally liquefied the ground.
Just the concussion alone from those impacts.
It would rupture your eardrums and hemorrhage your lungs if you were anywhere close. The ground inside the bunker starts heaving like a massive earthquake. Richter is watching geysers of earth erupting outside that are 50, 60 feet high in the air.
And naturally, when you're getting pounded from the sea, he looks up to the sky. Because German military doctrine says, don't worry, the glorious Luftwaffe will protect you from above.
Right. Where is the Air Force? He frantically scans the sky, desperate for a squadron of Messerschmitts or Focke-Wulfs to come swoop down and sweep these ships away.
And what does he actually see?
Allied stars, just everywhere he looks. Mustangs, Spitfires, Thunderbolts swarming the coastline.
The stats on this particular point are mind-blowing. I want to make sure we get this exactly right. How many sorties, meaning individual combat flights, did the Germans manage to put up on D-Day?
Across the entire invasion front. About 300. And mostly just hit-and-run scouting missions.
300. And the Allies?
Over 14,000.
14,000 to 300. I mean, that's not even a battle. That's a parade.
It's total, unquestioned air supremacy. 40 Allied planes for every single German plane in the sky. And this brings us to the absolute core of this deep dive, what the source calls the industrial epiphany.
Yes, this is the part that fundamentally changes how you view the entire Second World War. The source material says that as this naval bombardment is hammering down on him, Richter actually stops thinking like a frontline soldier. He stops thinking about crossfire tactics or flanking maneuvers.
He starts thinking like a factory manager. He looks at that endless stream of ships on the water, the sky completely black with planes, and his brain just shifts gears. He realizes he isn't fighting an army of men. He is fighting an industrial output.
He starts visualizing Detroit.
Exactly. He looks at the invasion fleet and he sees the assembly lines in Michigan. He sees the massive steel mills in Pittsburgh burning through the night. He realizes that this invasion isn't just a miracle of courage. Although the men on the beaches were incredibly courageous, it was the cold, inevitable result of a manufacturing equation.
I think we need a really good analogy here to make this clear. The text mentioned the sword versus the drop hammer, but let's modernize it a bit for the listener.
Okay, think of it like this. The German military philosophy was essentially like building a handcrafted Ferrari. Take the Tiger tank, for example. Beautiful engineering, incredible high performance, super complex, painstakingly built by master craftsmen.
But really hard to fix in the field and incredibly slow to build.
Very hard. Now look at the Allied approach. They didn't bring Ferraris to France. They brought 10,000 Ford F-150s.
And they really don't care if they wreck 5 of their trucks just to destroy your one Ferrari.
They don't care at all because there are 50 more F-150s rolling off the assembly line in Detroit every single hour. It's the industrial drop hammer in action.
And we actually have the tank production stats from the sources to back this up.
We do. In 1944 alone, the United States produced about 29,000 tanks. Germany, they never topped 2,000 in a single month. It was usually much, much less than that.
So even if your German Tiger is technically better than my American Sherman, which, gun to gun. It was, if I have 10 Shermans for every one Tiger you field, you lose.
You lose mathematically. And Richter realizes this in the bunker. He realizes that the Allies aren't planning to outfight the Panzers with superior battlefield tactics. They're simply planning to bury them under a literal mountain of steel.
That has to be a terrifying realization for a guy who was raised on Nazi ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole brand of the Third Reich was triumph of the will, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that superior Aryan willpower could somehow overcome any material disadvantage.
And that was the core lie of the regime. And standing in that shaking bunker, watching the 14,000th plane fly over his head, Richter sees right through it. He realizes that ideology cannot stop a heavy bomber. Willpower cannot sink a battleship.
The war wasn't being lost on the sand of Omaha Beach.
Mm-hmm.
It was lost in the factories, 3,000 miles away.
Precisely. And that realization brings him a kind of spiritual despair. He knew right then, at 7 a.m. on the very first day, that the war was entirely over.
But the physical fighting on the beach was just getting started. And I don't want to gloss over that at all, because Richter's division, the 352nd, they fought incredibly hard.
They did. Omaha Beach was an absolute slaughterhouse. We have to acknowledge that reality. The 352nd inflicted about 1,200 casualties on Omaha alone. For a few terrifying hours, it looked like the invasion might actually be stalled there. The F-150s were getting totally wrecked on the shore.
But then the special toys showed up.
Yeah.
The technological surprises.
Hobart's funnies. These were highly specialized British tanks that the Germans had never seen or planned for. Richter looks through his binoculars and suddenly sees a tank with a giant spinning flail on the front of it, just beating the ground to detonate the landmines safely.
Crab tank.
Right. And then he sees the DUKWs, the amphibious trucks, driving supplies directly out of the deep water and right onto the sand. And he sees the Duplex drive tanks, which were Sherman tanks that had canvas skirts and could literally float.
It must have looked like pure science fiction to him.
It looked like cheating. The Germans assumed tanks needed a captured deep-water port to unload. The Allies just drove them out of the ocean and onto the beach.
And then there's the story of the destroyers. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of D-Day history. The assault troops are pinned down on Omaha. The air support is struggling to hit targets because of the heavy cloud cover, so the Navy just steps up.
This part is incredible. The captains of the destroyer ships, like the USS Frankfurt and the McCook, they see the Army getting chewed up on the sand, so they completely break protocol. They turn their massive ships and steam directly toward the beach.
They got suicidally close.
Literally scraping the bottoms of their steel hulls on the submerged sandbars. They got within 800 yards of the seawall. That is absolute point-blank range for a naval gun.
Unbelievable.
They started blasting the concrete bunkers, maybe the very bunker Richter was in, looking through their own optical sights, and just blowing the German artillery pieces right out of the concrete embrasures.
So Richter is watching his elite division get systematically dismantled piece by piece. The impenetrable wall is literally crumbling into dust. What actually happens to him?
His battery is completely destroyed. The gun pits take direct, devastating hits from those Navy destroyers. The phone lines back to headquarters are dead. He is completely isolated. And as he looks out over the water one last time, he sees the first wave of landing craft being replaced by a second wave, and then a third.
The conveyor belt.
It just never stops. By the end of D-Day, the Allies had landed over 150,000 men and 1,500 tanks on the French coast. Richter realizes that his men could kill 1,000 soldiers, and 1,000 more would just step off the boat 5 minutes later to replace them.
That is heavy. So let's zoom out for a second. What happened to the 352nd Division after D-Day was over?
They were annihilated. By the time they finally retreated from Normandy weeks later, the division was just a ghost. For Richter and the few survivors, the rest of the war, the long retreat across France, the border battles, the Battle of the Bulge, it was just a formality.
A very bloody formality.
A tragic, bloody delay of the inevitable.
It's interesting because we usually think of the end of the Third Reich as the Battle for Berlin.
Right.
The Soviet army fighting in the streets, Hitler in the bunker under the Chancellery in 1945. That's the traditional end.
Historically and politically, yes, that is the end. But the real takeaway I want listeners to sit with today is that for the men on the Atlantic Wall, the psychological end of the war was the morning of June 6, 1944.
The exact moment the math stopped adding up.
The moment they realized they weren't fighting an army of men. They were fighting the full, unrestrained power of the global industrial complex. And you simply can't shoot a factory with a rifle.
That is a perspective shift that really sticks with you. You picture a guy looking through his binoculars, fully expecting a battle of wits and courage, and instead, he basically sees the entire GDP of the United States coming across the water to crush him.
And knowing deep down there is absolutely nothing he or anyone else can do to stop it.
It really makes you wonder about the nature of warfare today. I mean, if Richter was right, and that war was truly decided by industrial output before the first shot was even fired on the beach.
It raises a massive question for us. In a modern conflict, is the victor decided before the war even begins? Is it now just a matter of who has the better microchip fabrication plants, the better automated drone factories, the deeper global supply chains?
Maybe the war is over before the first trigger is ever pulled. We're all just waiting for the math to play out on the battlefield.
Just like Richter sitting in that bunker.
On that somewhat terrifying but fascinating thought, that is a wrap for this deep dive. It's a completely different way to look at history, not just looking at the bullets, but looking at the assembly lines behind them.
Because the assembly lines explain why the bullets are there in the first place.
Exactly. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.